Broadway show that first came out in the 1970s that stars the main character named Bobbie. Now, Bobbie in the original play is a man who is turning 35 and is asking questions of, should I get married? What does it all mean? What should I do? Who should I get married to? Is there a point in getting married? What is that point? And he is left to look at his 5 couple friends who portray very different views of being married or together, and those questions are all asked. Now, Bobbie in 2024 is a female lead, where those questions ring even more true. So the play starts out with Bobbie entering her apartment, and she has balloons that say 35. So Bobbie is turning 35 and her friends throw her a surprise party. Now, I have heard that at a certain age, people don't like to say how old they are, so I'm sure, and we could see Bobbie struggling with the idea of being 35 and her still not knowing which direction she wants to go in. So from what we understand, Bobbie is single, and there's a few people that she knows that she's met throughout her years, and she explores some of those relationships as well as getting an inside look into the relationships of her friends. And we see Bobbie's friends come and give her presents in the first few scenes, and all of them say, well, you can return it. Now, that is a pretty important point that comes up right away is, here, I gave you this gift, but you can return it. You should exchange it for money. You don't have to keep it. And it is a really important point about gifts, but also about life in general. When somebody offers you something, it is up to you to decide whether you want it or not. And it was up to Bobbie to decide whether the life that was being offered to her, or the gifts, which life was represented through these gifts, was being offered to her, and it was up to her to decide if she wanted it or not. And all of her friends were saying, you can exchange it, you don't have to keep this. Some of the partners liked the gifts and some of them didn't. So when we are offered something, we don't have to accept it in the way that person wants us to. Once something is given to us, it is up to us to decide what we want or what we don't want. And it was up to Bobbie to decide if these gifts were what she wanted, or if what their friends had in their own lives was the kind of life that she wanted to live. So she gets her presents, they throw her a surprise party, and then we see her go and have dinner with one of her friends who's a couple. Now, this couple was very interesting. It's probably the hallmark of the very generic idea of a couple that many think of when they think of married for a long time and struggling. The husband wanted to stop drinking because he had run into multiple problems, and the wife wanted to lose weight. And it seemed like both of them were struggling with these separate issues, and both of them were in some ways lying to the other about how well adjusted they were. So Bobbie is there acting as this third party that is kind of keeping the peace, but ultimately they kind of go at each other and they yell at each other, scream at each other. In the end, they get back together and they have fun and they enjoy each other's company. And it is all done in these boxes that showcases parts of their house. So what we are getting to see is what life looks like when you put it behind a box and you get to jump from box to box. And that is something that is often referred to in life, is you are checking a box. So it was up to Bobbie to decide if this was a box that she wanted to check, which is the ultimate struggle throughout the entire play, is will Bobbie get married? Does she want to? And if she doesn't, what is life gonna look like for her? Because she doesn't have any friends that aren't a couple. So we see her struggle with looking at the first relationship. She sees that they have a lot of problems. They have issues lying to each other, but she also sees that they really do care about each other. So she's still left with a lot of questions. She goes on her way and she hops upon another couple where they are enjoying their time outside of a New York City apartment. And you can tell that this couple has been together for the years that they were younger and are now transitioning into being a more adult couple together. And they are smoking weed. And Bobbie is more into it than the husband is, and her friend, the wife, and the husband really gets into it, and then he starts talking, and The wife sort of gets jealous with how he's interacting with Bobbie, and Bobbie doesn't really know how to feel about it either, and the wife eventually tells the husband to go get some food and stuff like that. So Bobbie is forced to face with these dynamics as well. Being married seems to offer a great deal of things, but being married also offers a lot of rules that Bobbie isn't necessarily used to. From what we can gather in the play, she's a high-powered career woman. She gets to be independent and make her own decisions. She gets to meet people, but it's on her terms and it's under her own understanding. So Bobbie continues. The scenes always end with all the couples coming back on stage and asking Bobbie, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna choose along those lines? So Bobbie doesn't know. She continues to look into the lives of all of her friends to see what kind of company they have. So company is something that we are engaging with on a daily basis. The company that you keep at home and the company that you work for during the day. So company is this idea that we are always around and that we are always surrounding ourselves with. Now, the most important question that I took away from this play is what company are you keeping and what does it mean to you? But also that the answer to that question is that the most important company that you keep is your own, because there's multiple times where Bobbie was left on stage by herself singing, asking these questions, wondering, questioning, hoping, and ultimately not really knowing the answer yet. So at the end of the day, the most important company we can keep is our own, and that needs to be the best relationship that we can have. So she has her monologue singing, and then she comes upon a wedding day. One of her best friends is getting married, and he's getting married to his fiance, who is also a guy. And this is also a deviation from the original play where Jamie was Amy. So Amy in the original play, just as Jamie in this play, are asking the questions of, do I want to get married? Should I get married? He has cold feet, but more significantly, and there is a great deal of questions of saying, just because we can, should we, and is this actually what I want, or is this what is expected of me? So these were the questions that Amy in the original was going through, and now this is what Jamie is asking of himself. In this play, he knows that his fiance is a great guy, but he does not want to get married, and we feel for him that there is this expectation from society that tells us you need to get married, you have to want this, you have to want this thing that everybody else does, and if you don't, that there is something wrong with you. And that was really what Jamie struggled with throughout that entire scene. And he leaves a note behind for his fiance to say, I don't want to get married. His fiance sees it and he runs out the door, and it suddenly starts raining. Jamie realizes that he ran out there without an umbrella. He grabs an umbrella and says, I love him, I have to marry him. So it very quickly speeds up the line of questioning that we all go through whenever we meet people, whenever we're forced to deal with a situation, when we're asked to make a choice about our life that is for the long haul. And every choice you make, you can see from that perspective, but especially when it comes to relationships and the people that we surround ourselves with. Bobbie got to see the entire thing unfold in front of her, and she equally had no idea what to do or what to think, but she also asked Jamie if they should just get married and put all of this behind them, and that they don't have to worry about it anymore. If they get married, no one's ever gonna ask them, are they gonna get married? Who are they gonna end up with? And those sort of questions, she just wanted to check the box and move on and focus on her life in her own way. Jamie doesn't want to do that. He goes after her, and they eventually do get married from what we understand, and the boxes change again. Now Jamie has been married, and Bobbie is left with looking at the options that she has had over the years. There is one person that she had fallen in love with when she was younger, and they rekindle on the stage, and she asks him, why did we never get married? And it is unrequited love to an extent, but it's also love that was lost. And we get to see Bobbie struggle with that. He tells her that he's going to the Cape and he's gonna get married, and that this is the last time they're going to see each other. So Bobbie is left with wondering, well, why wasn't I the one that he married? And then based off of her thoughts from the last scene, we wonder if that was ever something she actually wanted from that person, or was this something that she thought she should want looking back? That it would have been so much easier that if she was 25 and just married the guy that she did care about at the time, would her life be a lot easier right now? And we look at her struggle with that idea because she mentions, well, I'm free now. I get to live in the city and get to go wherever I want. And there's a freedom that is mine that nobody else gets to take from me and that I don't have to answer. So we don't think that Bobbie would have been a good match at the time for that person. And that is really the struggle of it all, is can we really look back to the past and want to make a different decision? Could Bobbie have been the person she is now, having married that person many years ago? Probably not. And that's probably not what she would have wanted anyway. So how do you reconcile the past with what's currently going on and accept it that it's in the past? There's no point in wanting better or wanting more from it. It's just gone. And when those people who were in our past come up and they say they miss us, which version of us do they miss? And does that version exist anymore? And I think Bobbie had to struggle with that idea, and eventually she lets it go and she moves on to the person that she's currently dating. And they talk a little bit, and there's another person she talks to who is more of just a person you meet in the city and you have a fun night with, but isn't someone that you're going to be with forever. But that's also an important question. Is the company that we keep for short amounts of time just as important as the long term? And at the end of the day, you get to learn about yourself in all of these situations. Bobbie learned about herself from that relationship that she thought was going to be a marriage. She learned from that guy she only knew for a few days, and she learned from the guy that she was currently with, who we get to see her questioning an even bigger way of what life would look like if they were together. So we start to see her going through the questioning of saying, hey, what if this was the guy that I was with? And we get to see many versions of Bobbie come in and out of the boxes, where her life, we can see, is like a Groundhog Day, where she's living the same life over and over again. And then we can also see her getting to have a baby that she brings home, and that she cooks dinner, and that she enjoys her time with this guy. And it is a scene that is unfolding. The clock is running and the scenes are changing. So she gets a sneak peek into what this life would look like with this person. And then Bobbie is left with the questions of, is this what I actually want? The scene changes one last time, and she is with her friend who's much older than her, who I would guess is 15, 20 years older than her, more of like a mother figure. And she hears about her tales of wanting to marry the person that she was with when she was young, and she did marry them. And they separated because she wanted to stay in New York City and he moved to Chicago, and she didn't want to go there. So they were married when they were young, and then she grows a little bit older and she gets married again. And the person that that friend is with seems to be hitting on Bobbie at times. And her friend is just like, if that's what you want, I'm not going to stand in your way. I know he's my husband, but if this is something you want, I won't stand in your way. And Bobbie is left in this murky gray area of, what is marriage? What is the point? Is there true love? Does love last forever? Does it end? What happens when it ends? And she has another couple who wants to get divorced, and they go through the process, and they have a very funny way of talking about their divorce, saying, we were always better divorced. We should have never been married. We are much better as divorced people, and that we should always be that. And they are together, but they're divorced technically, so they're not married, but they're still together because they do just have a little child. So Bobbie really gets to experience so many different experiences of being in a relationship, and of both being an outsider and being a part in a relationship, even if you're not necessarily the couple in it. So she got to view her friends deciding that he did want to get married. She gets to see her friends deciding they don't want to be married and would rather be divorced but still be together. She sees her older friend who just accepts that him being with other women is just a part of her life and she's just going to be okay with it because he has money and this is just the cards she was dealt with and is playing them. She sees her friends who've been married for a long time who definitely have a disdain for one another but are still choosing to be together. And Bobbie gets to view all of these relationships and ask the questions, and she really gets to the point of, what do I want? Is marriage real? Is this something that's even possible? And the play ends with Bobbie on stage by herself, asking these questions, wondering, questioning. She runs off, and we don't actually know what Bobbie decides other than she didn't decide. And that is a decision in and of itself. She doesn't know. She doesn't know where she wants to be. She doesn't know who she wants to be. And that's okay. And they come back and she is 35 and there's a little present that she gets and it's her in her apartment, which was the opening scene, and there's the two little balloons that say 35 on it. So she gets to have one more time a look into her life and not being just a figure within it. She gets to actually look into it. So what does that omnipresent view give us? When we can take all these steps back, and when we can look at our friends and the relationships that are portrayed in our personal life, on TV, in the world at large, and look at the messaging that the world gives us. I'm sure Bobbie is constantly told, which we see in this, who are you gonna marry? What's your next choice? Who's the lucky guy? When are you gonna find him? When are you gonna settle down? And we see Bobbie being questioned that, we see Bobbie asking that of herself, and what we don't really see is Bobbie getting the space to say, why do I need this? Why can't I just be okay by myself? That's really not one of the options that is presented, except for the times that Bobbie's standing alone on the stage having a singing monologue. So when we are presented with that question, what do we do? What can we learn from Bobbie? Well, Bobbie is an important character to be portrayed nowadays and in this current climate, because women for the first time have so many more options than the one that they've always had, which is get married and be dependent on somebody else. Bobbie isn't dependent on anyone. She has her own apartment, she has her own friends, and she makes her own decisions. This is not something that they could have played in the 1970s with a female lead. In the 1970s, women did not have any of those options. So it's very powerful that 50 years later, we get to ask the questions of, can Bobbie choose to be by herself? Because 50 years ago, that was a question that only men got to ask. And even then was controversial for men. Now it is much more normal for people to choose to be on their own, or choose to get divorced, or choose to have different blended families in the ways that they decide for themselves, because they have the financial freedom to make those decisions for themselves. In the 70s, women were not allowed to make any decision for themselves. They couldn't own property. They couldn't really have any high-paying jobs. And now Bobbie gets to ask these questions, and it's amazing to be 50 years later watching a play where we have evolved so much that we get to ask these questions. We don't necessarily have to have the same answer that women have always had to have. And that is the most important thing that I took from this play, is Bobbie gets to ask these questions. She gets to ask, and though people will judge her, she still gets to decide. She does not have to get married. She does not have to settle for the flight attendant or the guy who keeps flaking on her, or settle for the guy that she thought she loved 15 years back and doesn't anymore. She does not have to settle it. She gets to question, she gets to decide. And that being the ending is the most important part, where Bobbie decides that she isn't ready to make a decision, and that's okay. Bobbie's 35, and for many people that is too old for her to continue to live this bachelor lifestyle, which was in the 70s too old for a man to be making those decisions, which is why Company was so controversial when it came out, and why it's so pivotal right now to have a female lead being able to ask these questions. So it's not that the important question isn't that, oh, is Bobbie gonna get married? The important question is the fact that it can be questioned, that it's something that she can decide. That's what's important. Because if this was the 70s, she would have been married. She would not have had another choice, or she would have been dependent on a man in a different capacity. So that's why Company is so important, and why it's something that could easily be missed. Because at the end of the day, the company we keep is important, because the most important company is our own. You need to get good with that. And we live in a time where you can get good with that, where women can live alone and make decisions for themselves, and be making the decisions later on in life to choose to get married, to choose to have children. And there may be a biological time where women can no longer have children, but that doesn't mean that children don't exist in a way for us to be able to have them in our own life. Whether that's adopting at a later age or choosing to adopt at a younger age, there is many different ways to be a person in this world that chooses to live life the way they want to. And the fact that Bobbie got to make those decisions for herself is the most important part. And when you are asked, hey, are you gonna get married? It can be really annoying when people ask that, but do understand that you are asked a question that women were not allowed to have a differing opinion on. You can say, no, I don't want to now. Women couldn't say it before. You had to get married. There was no other choices. So the fact that we get to see Bobbie have choices, we get to see her experience life and make decisions for herself, is the most important part. So whether you want to get married today or tomorrow or whenever, you have the ability to choose nowadays. You can say yes or no, or maybe you can forge a life separate from anyone else and anybody else's decision for your life. You don't need somebody else to agree or disagree with the choices that you get to make, and that is the most exciting part. Company was pretty good. It ended pretty abruptly, it felt, at the end, but that's also how life goes, and there's a lot of cinematic decisions within it that are pretty important, and we get to see life through these boxes, but life is not a box to check, and that's really what Bobbie tells us at the end. This isn't a box to check. This is a decision you get to make. And it's a decision you get to decide. Whatever decision you make, you just full-heartedly have to deal with those consequences. Whether you choose to get married or choose not to, or choose any of the past that life has to offer, you have to deal with the consequences, and you get to create the life that you want because of that. Go and create the life that you want. Let me know if you've watched Company, what you thought, the re-edition of 2024 versus the 1971, and we will talk very soon. I hope you have an amazing day.